How would you deal with the ability to see people's past? How would you act if you could change the future? One man chooses to do the right thing over living a selfish life. The movie begins by showing a teacher, John Smith, reading Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven to his high school class. Then when class is over, he meets with another teacher in the hallway, who seems to be his girlfriend. After school, both of them ride on a roller coaster. John gets uneasy after it ends. Then he drives her home. While they stand near her front door, she asks him if he wants to come in. He tells her that he does not, adding that some things are worth waiting for. When he walks to his car, she runs to him and they kiss. Then he says that he will marry her. John drives away after that. As he drives on the road, a huge truck in front of him flips, and its attachment takes up the entire road. He tries to ride around it, but sees it too late due to the rain and so crashes into its edge. The car flips, and the driver of the truck comes by to help John. After some time, we see John's girlfriend Sarah arrive at a hospital. She comes to see John lying on a bed in his injured state. Telling him not to leave her, she cries. Then she adds that they will get married, so he must stay. The next scene has John in awakened state. He is greeted by Dr. Sam Wyzak. He tells John that he was a guest at his hospital for a while. He further says that he was in a bad accident and was smashed rather badly. In response to those words, John touches himself in order to understand how badly he was injured. He notices no bandages on him and even asks about their absence. But what Dr. Wyzak does is tell John that his parents are there to see him. When he brings them in, John tells them that he is lucky because he is free of bandages. And then the doctor reveals to John that he was in a coma. John asks his father for how long, and they all hesitate to tell him. But then his mother finally says that it lasted for 5 years. The first thing that comes to his mind to ask about is Sarah. His mother tells him to forget about her because she is married. Upon hearing that, John becomes distraught and retreats into himself. At another time, a nurse comes in while John sleeps and tends to him. While she does, he grabs her hand. Then he looks to his left and sees a burning image. He says the name Amy several times and sees a little girl screaming in the corner in that image. The nurse then tells him that Amy is her daughter's name. John tells her that her daughter is in a burning house and that it's not too late. He keeps holding her hand and seeing the burning image. He also keeps saying her daughter is screaming and that she should hurry. After that, the nurse runs away. We see her arrive at the location of the burning house and hold her daughter. In the next scene, John sits in a wheelchair. Dr. Wyzak tells him that his ligaments got smaller when John was in his coma. He then asks the doctor if he will live in a wheelchair, and the doctor tells him that it won't be long if he could help him. Then John takes his hand and gets another image. It looks like it could be the Second World War. As he sees it, John says that a wound is loose. To this, Dr. Wyzak asks him if he is okay, but John just keeps watching. He then sees a lady delivering a little boy to someone else, and then those people riding away. He tells the doctor that the boy is safe. Then he says it again and gets up from his wheelchair, but he is too weak to stand, and so he falls. The doctor then tends to him and asks him about the boy, and John tells him that he, the doctor, is the boy, and that his mother saved him. But Dr. Wyzak tells him that his mother is dead. John contradicts him, saying that she is alive and that he knows her name and where she lives. When he gets questioned as to how he knows that, John just states that he is scared. Later on, Dr. Wyzak sits in his office and makes a phone call. He asks to speak with a lady named Johanna. When she comes to the phone and starts speaking, however, the doctor becomes at a loss for words. Then with John at a table, the doctor tells him that he has a special ability, and that it is either very new or very old. He tells him that he was right about his mother, but he further says that he did not speak to her. And when asked as to why, the doctor answers that it was not meant to be. We then see John being taught to walk on crutches near a house. From that house, Sarah soon comes out. The both of them speak about a few things in the house. One of them is that she got married. The second is that she has a baby son. When John looks at her in a certain way, she becomes uncomfortable, and he tells her that 5 years passed for her. But it feels like the next day to him, his feelings have not changed. Sarah then says to him why it had to happen like this, and he says that it's bad luck. She tells him that he's the talk of the town because he has the power of second sight. John then recites a line from the story Sleepy Hollow, a line that states no one wanted anything from the main character of that story anymore. And then he says that's what he wants for himself. After that, we see Sarah driving away in her car and crying. John is with Dr. Wyzak in his office. He tells the doctor that he wants it to stop, and then he sits at a press conference. A man asks John to make a prediction about a current situation, but John is not in tune with current events. Dr. Wyzak then says that he will not take any more questions, but the man still proceeds to ask again. John tells him he does not know anything about what he's being asked to predict, and then he says that the situation with the nurse was different. He touched her hand. The man then gets up and wants John to touch his hand. When he does, he quickly regrets it because John presents to him an uncomfortable personal problem about his sister ending her life. The man becomes very uneasy and then badmouths John before he leaves. John's parents watch the meeting on TV and his mother becomes overwhelmed to a sickening state because of it. The next scene has John going to the hospital to see her. He touches her hand and her head falls to the side. It is very likely that she passed away. Then we see two policemen drive to a house. One of them gets out of the car and heads for the front door. The person that opens it is John's father. The policeman then gets invited in. And when he's in there, he says he came there for John. He introduces himself as Sheriff Bannerman. He tells them about some serious crimes happening, and a criminal he calls the Castle Rock killer that is causing them. Then he starts speaking about John's psychic powers, and upon hearing that, John leaves the policeman's side. But the sheriff says that he could really use his help against such crimes. John's response is that he tells him he made a mistake. The sheriff then mentions the passing away of John's mother. Then he says to John that if God blessed him with a gift, then he should use it. But John yells about how God sent him the opposite of a gift by taking away 5 years from his life, and the many negatives that came with that. With that, the sheriff tells him that if he changes his mind, he knows where to find him. And then he leaves. Afterwards, John's father tells him that he wishes his mother was here to talk to him about this situation. John says that when the spells come to him, he feels like he's dying inside. Then, through the window, he sees Sarah arriving in her car and getting out. John comes out to greet her, and sees that she brought her son. Then she comes in with him and there she puts him to sleep. After that, Sarah tells John that the last time they were alone he told her that some things were worth waiting for. Then she tells him that they waited long enough. And after those words, they start engaging in romance. After their romantic debut, they sit and eat at the table. After they do that, John escorts Sarah to her car and she leaves. John returns home and watches the television. On it, the murders that Sheriff Bannerman spoke about are discussed, and the sheriff himself is there on TV. He speaks to the audience, asking anyone out there to help him. After he speaks, the announcer states that the Castle Rock killer has 9 victims to his name, and the most recent victim is a teenage girl. John's father stands there near the door, watching the TV with him. John tells him that he's going to help the sheriff. In the next scene, John walks with Sheriff Bannerman and another officer in a tunnel. The sheriff explains to John what he believes took place there to the most recent victim. John asks him if he has anything that the killer might have touched or worn, and Bannerman gives him a pack of cigarettes. John touches them and looks around the tunnel. Then he tells them that he got nothing. After that, the sheriff gets radioed that there is another victim. The policeman and John arrive at the scene of the crime. Once there, they uncover the new victim, and it is a female. Officer Dodd is instructed to move people away from the crime scene, and so he does. Dodd also tells them that he knows the victim. Her name is Alma. John then touches Alma's hand, and this time he gets an image. He sees her walking near the gazebo, and the killer calls her name. At that point, John says that she knows the killer. He sees how he calls Alma to the gazebo, and repeats to the officers that she knows him. Then he sees her come to him. The killer takes hold of her and shows her a pair of scissors on the inside of his coat. After seeing that, Alma tries to be set free from his hold, but he brings her down. And then John sees him bring his scissors down on her. This causes him to panic, and the sheriff has to take hold of him. John tells him that he saw the killer's face, and the killer is Dodd. Bannerman then calls Dodd, but gets told by another that he took off in his car. The sheriff looks back at John, and John says that he saw his face. He then repeats that point to drive it home. The sheriff and John then arrive at Dodd's home. Bannerman tells him to stay near the car. He then knocks on the door and a lady opens it. She tells him that Dodd is not there. But then John comes to them and says that he saw Dodd in the window. Afterwards, we see Dodd lock himself behind a door. Bannerman then lets himself in the house and runs upstairs. John gets in too, and then he takes the hand of Dodd's mother. He tells her that she knew. To that, she calls John the devil. Meanwhile, we see Dodd in the bathtub. When the sheriff finally busts through the door, he sees a quivering, finished Dodd. Then his mother takes his gun and shoots John. And just in time, the sheriff comes out and shoots her. In the following scene, Dr. Wyzak arrives at John's house. He tells him that he's still his doctor and they have to stay in touch. Then he assumes that John's headaches are getting worse, and John tells him that he gets about 3 or 4 of them per day. Then he tells the doctor that he's not getting better, but worse. After that, Dr. Wyzak tells John that he has done some research into cases such as his. He tells John that as the visions get stronger, the body becomes weaker, and then the man with the gift asks him if he will die. His doctor says that they can stop or even reverse the process, and tells John to come back with him to the clinic. But John does not want to go back there. The thought of Dr. Wyzak, however, is that John needs to be in a controlled environment. John then gets up and says that he wants to show him something. He opens a door and we see a large assortment of mail. He says that it is mail from people asking him for his help. John says that he cannot leave the house because of this kind of attention. He adds that he is already in a controlled environment. Sometime later, John teaches a little girl to read. He is now no longer a high school teacher, but a private tutor. When the little girl leaves, a man comes to him so John could help his son. He says that his son won't participate in school, and then that John should visit his house to help him from there. But John tells him that is not the way he does things. The man speaks to him some more, and ends up convincing John to come on some other day. Then on that day, John arrives. He enters his house, and meets his very talkative politician friend. Then the man takes John to his son's room and leaves them both alone there. While there, John tells the boy, Chris, that he doesn't know what to do with him, and that his father tells him that Chris lives in a shell. But then the boy tells him that he doesn't have to do anything. He adds that it's his father that lives in a shell, not him. Later, Chris's father sees John and his son walk outside, bonding fairly well. Then when he gets home, he tells John that he's doing well with him. After that, he turns on the television and shows him Greg Stilson giving a political speech. The man asks John if he remembers him. Then he tells John to vote against him, and that he is a turkey. Furthermore, he says that Greg is dangerous. They then watch him finish his energetic speech. The next scene has a man entering his home at night. There in the dark, he finds Greg Stilson with his associate. Greg calls the man Mr. Brenner. He tells him that he is going to be the president one day, and he says it with an attitude. He then talks to Mr. Brenner about an editorial that he is set to publish tomorrow. That editorial will supposedly harm Greg's reputation. Greg wants to make a deal with Brenner. He tells him to stay out of the campaign business, and Greg will stay out of the publishing business. He has his associate show Brenner pictures that could really harm him. They intend to use them against him as blackmail. With enough of a threat established, Greg and his crony then leave. The scene changes to John and Chris at John's home. Chris reads The Raven. As he reads it, John tells him to skip to a passage that resonates with John. It most likely gives him thoughts of Sarah. When Chris finishes it, John gets a ring on the front door. He opens it and sees a man wanting to talk about Greg Stilson. John tells him to come back later because he is teaching now. The man is okay with it, but asks him if he wants a brochure. When John accepts the offer, the man calls his wife to bring it. And when his wife approaches John with the brochure, he sees that it is Sarah. They all then speak for a while and get acquainted. Sarah's husband tells John that she told him a lot about him. Then they leave, and John cries. Chris comes to him. And when John touches Chris, he gets an image of Chris drowning in the water wearing a hockey uniform. Then the boy's ride arrives and he has to leave. John decides to go with him. When they arrive, John sees his father, Roger, organize a set of hockey uniforms for his son. And John tells him to call it off. Roger gets confused, but doesn't listen to him. Then when they enter Roger's house, John follows them and repeats himself. After that, he slams a vase and breaks it. When it breaks, John says that the ice will break. Frustrated with his abrupt behavior, Roger tells John that he wants him out forever. But then his son intervenes and states that he agrees with John. Then Roger sides with his son and calls the hockey practice off. Later on, when John is gone, Roger comes to his son's room and asks if they are going. But Chris gets confused and says that he called it off. His father then says he said that to get rid of John. But Chris, choosing to listen to his tutor, does not go. Perhaps on the next day, John walks outside and picks up a newspaper. On it is written that 2 people drowned in a skating accident. We then see Roger sitting negatively thoughtful in his house. His phone rings, but he does not pick it up. His son, however, does. He asks who is on the other line, but John does not answer. The scene changes to show a campaign outside John's house. John decides to join it. As he walks about there, Greg Stilson arrives, and the crowd cheers. It greets many people and shakes many hands. Then he comes to John and shakes his hand. John gets an image of Greg telling a general to put his hand on some scanner. He threatens him to do it, and then the man does. Afterwards, Greg does it too, and then finishes the procedure by pressing a big button. He states that it is his destiny. Then he comes out of the room and tells other people in power that the missiles are flying. After that long and uneasy image, Greg rips his hand from John's grasp. Greg then walks away, seeming very uncomfortable. With Dr. Wyzak now, John asks him what he would do if he went back in time and met Hitler before he came to power. He asks him if he would destroy Hitler. The doctor does not answer him, but instead asks if that is what he called him there for. John then tells him that in his vision of Chris's drowning, there was something that he could not see. He calls it a dead zone. He also tells him that he had the vision, but that he also prevented it from happening in real life. The doctor then tells him that he could change the future, and not just see it, that is the dead zone. Then John comes back to his main question and asks Dr. Wyzak what he would do. But the doctor hesitates to answer. When he sees that John is serious about it, he succumbs and says that he is a doctor and that he loves people. Therefore, he would be forced to end Hitler's life. After that, John comes home and pulls out a rifle behind a shelf. He then rides a bus, and his voiceover speaks, stating that he is writing a letter to Sarah. He says that he was running and hiding all this time. He then says that by the time she gets this letter, it will all be over. There was no one for him except her, but unfortunately, their being together was not in the cards. He finishes the letter by telling Sarah that he will always love her. Then he enters a campaign building by breaking its window and going through it with his rifle. He sits and sleeps in some corner, and then he wakes up when people start arriving. He readies his rifle and takes out its ammo. However, one of the bullets falls to the floor beneath and gets kicked by someone. And then the man of the hour, Greg Stilson, arrives. We also see Sarah there with her son and husband. When he gets to the podium and speaks for several seconds, John stands up with his rifle and aims it at Greg. Sarah sees him and says his name in surprise. John shoots his rifle, but misses and blows off a microphone. When Greg realizes that his life is in danger, he defends himself. He gets his picture taken when he does that. John is about to fire again, but his associate shoots his hand, making the man with the gift drop his rifle, and then he gives his stomach some lead. John falls to the floor after that. Greg Stilson runs to him and screams as to who sent him. While he has his hands on him, John gets an image of a changed future of the man running for senator. Greg sits there alone, with a magazine and a gun. The cover of the magazine is a career-ending picture of Greg defending himself. His future is now doomed, and John smiles an accomplished smile. He says that it's over and that he's finished with Greg. Then Greg runs off. Sarah then comes to John and cries. She hugs him and he says goodbye to her. She tells him that she loves him. And then John leaves the world, only a minute after having saved it.